Hello, welcome to Cyber Focus. My name is Joel Arnold. Our guest today is Ayanna Young Marshall. She's a lawyer and lecturer of international business at the University of the West Indies, the Cave Hill campus. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start off with just a general open question. As an expert in international trade and international business in general, as well as globalization, has there been anything that surprised you about the global recession and how that's affected international trade?
Well, not much has surprised me because of the proximity of our markets, our financial, our capital markets, to the rest of the world, as you mentioned. Because of globalization, we felt the effects at the same time or a short while thereafter. What surprised me, perhaps, is that there is hope on the horizon. I shouldn't say that has surprised me, but what's happening is that folks are finding different ways of responding to the crisis. So in a way, we needed a crisis. And in our part of the world where we need very much to diversify our economies, there's been a bit of focus away from traditional to survive. So that it's almost like we have a tight economic period every 10 years almost, because we had the early 90s, the early at the beginning of the 2000s and so forth. So what's not surprising but what's pleasing is that our companies and individuals and workforce are trying to innovate a little bit to diversify it in order to cope with the crisis. And I think that there are going to be a lot of opportunities as a result of that. So.
Well, you mentioned that in a way you felt as though your region in particular needed a crisis in a way. Could you go
I know that's
a little
very
more?
controversial, but I think crisis breeds innovation, right? When you think about most of the innovations in the larger countries post World War II and so forth, in terms of rebuilding their economies, there were crises that catapulted all of these innovations. So similarly, in our part of the world, you find, because we're so vulnerable, it's not just the shock of the economic or the financial crisis. It could be a hurricane or what have you. And so I think built into our systems, our daily lives, perhaps are responding, and the ability to respond to crises. But in this case, because it's been so major, I think that we are looking at, and because at the same time we're hoping not to respond accidentally but to respond strategically, I think it will argue well in terms of diversifying the economy and decisions that governments will make in terms of incentives for new sectors and just the urgency of responding. So that's a positive.
One of the ways that a government or policymakers might respond to a recession of this kind would be a little bit go the opposite direction and maybe do more of a protectionist kind of a mindset where they try to protect what's already there. Have you seen that? Do you see that as something countries would likely do going forward?
Well, you have seen some degree of a race to support what's local. And I think that's government's imperative, right? But in terms of, when I spoke in terms of the firms' responses. And we always say that it's firms that trade, it's governments that facilitate. Governments don't really trade, although it's attributed to the country.
Sure.
So the firms themselves are responding, because if you don't respond, you'll lose, you'll shut down, So we, governments have become a little more supportive of different sectors. Like in Barbados, there are discussions about supporting the creative industries, which is a discussion that has been taking place for some time, but I think that now we're going to see some urgent attention. And there is continued support to the other sectors, tourism and the usual typical sectors, international business. But firms themselves, I think, have managed to impress on government that you do actually need to provide support no different from the support that in your country that the administration would have been looking to support vulnerable sectors. But I don't know. I don't know if I really want to speak too much about protectionism, because I think most of the countries in Barbados and the OECS have more or less acknowledged that the days of protectionism are pretty much over, and it's a matter of trying to convey to the rest of the world that we'll cope. We have no choice but to cope economically and otherwise. So perhaps another time.
Well, one of the ways that any economy or any policymaker, one of the ways that they promote innovation and sort of growing, it is the growing of new businesses and entrepreneurial ventures. You particularly work with a program called the SEED program. Could you tell me a little bit more about that and your involvement in it?
Yes. Now, SEED, it's the Student Entrepreneurial Empowerment Development Project. So in there it is entrepreneurial development and general empowerment of students. Now it is housed at the campus. It's based at Cave Hill campus. And it follows that the immediate constituency is students. Now, for many decades, the governments that we represent, the countries that we represent, have focused on education for empowerment. So persons that were previously dispossessed and poor have been given opportunities in current times because of their access to education. There's no abundance of money or natural resources, but education has been that bridge. So you found yourself with a position where there are many qualified persons, but the jobs obviously in a developing country are limited, right? And you have many persons racing for a few jobs. So our initiative hopes to encourage students, rather than looking at the already existing pool of jobs, to look along the lines of creating new jobs, not just for themselves, but also for others. So the project it's exciting, it's really exciting, and I'm happy to see that we are quite similar in terms of that your university, some of the emphases on trying to encourage the entire campus to innovate and so on. But the SEED project itself provides training on entrepreneurship, on running a business, and so forth. It connects participants to the important players, not just in business, but in terms of the organizations responsible for helping create businesses. The financiers, of course, and the project has been funded by two very important banks in Barbados, the Scotiabank, First Caribbean Bank, and there are other players who have supported. And then we have a business plan competition that we are about to launch, where students can actually get financing on a competitive basis, and we paid a lot of attention to your innovation competition, your idea competition. And the idea is that we want to mentor, to support, so that you can tangibly measure the creation of businesses at the end of the day. The imperatives are greater in our countries where the jobs are in short supply and where we feel the economic tightening a bit more. So it's a very exciting project. I hope I haven't left out too much. There'll be mentoring and there'll be support, lots of partnership with existing entities that are responsible for creating businesses, a lot of networking opportunities so that you don't have to do it alone. Teaching so that you have businesses, students who have their own business, as well as students who just have an idea. Because what we have found is that there are students who, they crochet clothes, they have cleaning businesses, they help people with research and so forth, and they make money on an informal basis to help themselves through school. Although the government pays for the economic costs, obviously you have to pay for books and survival and so forth, sustenance and so on.
If you mind me interrupting,
Sure.
So would you say the entrepreneurial spirit of the people of Barbados is very strong, and that there's a lot of opportunities there, whereas the culture...
The entrepreneurial spirit, I think, has been alive from time immemorial. Persons earned money on the side wherever possible. But now, as I said, these economic crises make it much more important. But I think there's an entrepreneurial spirit, but it's still necessary for the legal and regulatory framework to come in line with that and to facilitate it a little more.
Sure. Do you feel as though they are coming to the forefront, or are those areas lacking a little bit in order to use the entrepreneurial spirit that that exists to assist the economy of or your country and any country in general, to spur them out of the, I guess, the doldrums of the recession?
You mean the regulatory framework?
Yeah.
If that's... Oh, well, I'm sure you could go online and see how long it takes to establish a business or what have you. There's work to be done. And I think these are some of the realities in a developing country. But I think we'll get there. And again, the crisis is going to chase us. But there are exciting things happening. Like among our students, for example, there's greater attention being played on innovating, in inventing, in protecting that invention. So there's a lot of almost preoccupation with protection of intellectual property rights. And we recognize that while you might not have the capital to launch a business, you'll have the idea and you'd have protected it. And you will explore. And what SEED tries to do is also expose you to opportunities to find that capital, so that if you share equity or what have you, that you'll have greater opportunities than if you just created something in a lab somewhere and sat down on it and, got frustrated. So we're trying, that's the sort of diversification that I was speaking about.
I'd like to switch gears a little bit. You've spent a significant amount of your work in the past on services liberalization of trade services, particularly with the WTO programs, I suppose, is the best way to say it. Could you elaborate a little bit on what you've been doing? And
well, all of our countries in the CARICOM region are members of the WTO. We also have a network of trade agreements that we've entered into that are WTO compliant. Now, whereas we've had a formidable history of trading in goods, services, despite the fact that most of our countries are predominantly services economies, I mean, in 70+% in most cases.
You don't hear about that in the media as much.
Well, not that you don't hear about it in the media as much, but the rules and the opportunities and how to even measure the extent of trade in services differs in terms of goods. So we have spent a fair amount of time over the last 10 years educating firms about the opportunities in the services, because there are more opportunities and services for small countries, and I think, than in goods. In goods you have to build a factory and so forth. In services, and as we've seen in our visit here, you can sit down with your laptop and offer those services once you have the necessary technology, which we're also working on in Barbados. We hope to have the whole island Wi-Fi ready by November this year. Yes, which is, you can imagine the opportunities.
Definitely.
But so we've spent time just explaining to firms, predominantly because I've worked with firms more so than the government, explaining here are your obligations under the trade agreement. Here are the opportunities under the trade agreement. The most recent one is an arrangement with Europe, the Economic Partnership Agreement, and their opportunities in services, different sectors, whether it's chef services or fashion services or what have you. And of course the traditional professional services, again, because we have this education emphasis, their opportunities abound. So we explain those and we get feedback, so that firms then can explain to the negotiators what their needs are. So you don't go and negotiate in a vacuum, So that's been exciting, and now you have the trade agreement level, and you understand the opportunities in the trade agreements. But if you have market access somewhere and you don't have the capacity to supply, you're lost. So you pay attention to empowering businesses and identifying opportunities in terms of joint ventures or what have you. But then you now have to come down to an even deeper level where you're creating businesses, which is why we have the emphasis on entrepreneurship and innovation. So it's a continuum, and I think these are just the realities of a developing, an emerging economy or an emerging region, so that you think that we believe that we can swim. We believe that there are a number of sectors that we are competitive in and have liberalized, like financial services and so forth. But there are a number of sectors that we think that we can similarly compete in against the odds of small size and vulnerability and so on.
Have when you're advising clients, in particular in the Caribbean region, you bring up the topics of services liberalization or focus on services because we can compete at the highest level there.
Yes.
What is the biggest hurdle that you have to overcome, I guess, in the minds of your clients?
I think the biggest hurdle is accreditation. The nature of services is reputation and certification and so forth. And what we need to do is to ensure that our service providers are accredited by whatever body or institution or what have you to offer services in the foreign markets. So it's one thing to offer services domestically, but we're more concerned with earning foreign exchange. And unless you're accredited, you just simply cannot offer services. You might not even be able to enter the market. So that's been a big challenge, even in terms of pursuing opportunities under the EPA, the Economic Partnership Agreement, and CARICOM is negotiating with Canada right now. And again, these are regions that we have traditionally had as major trade partners, just as with the US, right? So, but we need to say, I can't come and say, look, I'm coming to offer legal services or advisory services arbitrarily. So that's the biggest challenge, I think. I think that there's growing recognition of the opportunities and services in the region. There's been an agenda to advise about the opportunities and so forth. Not ignoring the goods, the agriculture sectors, but there's definitely growing recognition. So I'd say accreditation is the biggest issue.
So for our final topic here, I have a question about how are the cultural differences of your home country preparing you guys for, launching yourselves out of this weak economy?
Okay, well, I'm not
in comparison to here, I suppose.
Yes. What's exciting about our culture and the opportunities in terms of our culture are relate to the creative industries. So, music. I know I don't have to mention any of our big stars. I am sure you've heard of all of them. Art and fashion and sectors that we didn't previously value because, traditionally you kept your culture, you didn't really embrace your culture, But now what you're seeing across the region is an embracing of who we are and a recognition that there are commercial opportunities in who you are. So again, as I had mentioned, all of the countries in Barbados and the OECS are trying to craft the incentives, frameworks, and otherwise to support the creative industries. And really, when you think about our impact on the world, based on in music in particular, and in a very short space of time, it's been significant, and then you can expand in other sectors like tourism that's based on your culture, so festival tourism or heritage tourism and all of these things. That's how I see our culture. I think that in a global village like ours, the American business person is really quite similar in their outlook to the Barbadian business person or what have you. But they might arrive at the meeting at a different time, but which is something that I myself am working on. But the outlook is ultimately the bottom line, right?
Sure.
And what we're trying to do is leverage partnerships and so forth. But I think a lot of opportunity. I know you were thinking of something different in terms of cultural differences, but the culture.
Not necessarily.
The opportunities in the creative industries. I think that's where in the next 5 years even, you will be seeing a much more strategic approach to opportunities in the creative sector in much the same way that we developed tourism and we incentivize tourism and we developed the international business sector in terms of the financial services and so forth. You're going to see a similar thing in terms of the creative industries and the linkages and the opportunities involved in the creative sector. And I'm sure that you will agree that We are very exciting people culturally, so the opportunities are endless. The opportunities are endless.
All right. Well, we'd like to thank our guest, Ayana Young Marshall, for joining us today. Thanks for coming. And thank you for tuning in to Cyber Focus. If you have any comments or would like to propose a topic, please contact us at cyber@indiana.edu. And thank you once again.